Good morning, everyone. Shabbat Shalom. So great to be here with you. I am in Boston. My little dog, Joey, is going back and forth between my office and my husband's. We'll see. It's the wrong Torah portion for people named Joseph, but he may make an appearance. We'll see, or you may hear him. So I'm really glad to be here with all of you today. And I especially love the book of Genesis. We are back at the beginning, as you well know. It's a little narcissistic, but my name is part of the book of Genesis, which must be why I like it the most. Jen Isis. And it was also my bat mitzvah was in the Parashat Breshit at the very beginning. So really love to learn with you today. And what we're going to do is actually, we're in Parashat Lech Lecha, but we're going to focus on a different part of the Parsha that I think most folks usually study. This Parsha is where Abraham is told, go on a journey, leave your land of your father and go to this land that I will show you. And we're actually going to fast forward a little bit further into the Parsha with Genesis 16, where we're going to learn about Hagar. I think she often gets short shrift, and I wanted to, there's really a lot of amazing learning to do about her. So as we do this, we're going to try to understand who she is, what her role is in the text vis-a-vis Sarah, and to see if we can gauge what the Torah thinks of her and also what our commentators think of her. And so I'm excited to learn with you all today. So I'm going to share my screen to Sefaria. Julie dropped a link in the chat if you'd prefer to look at Sefaria on your own screen, which is totally cool. Okay, you guys can see that okay? Great. All right. So I'd love a reader to read in English. Anyone want to volunteer to read? You can raise your hand. Wendy, I could see you getting ready to unmute. Go for it.
Great, thank you. Sarai, Abraham's wife, had borne him no children. She had an Egyptian maidservant whose name was Hagar. And Sarai said to Abram, look, the Lord has kept me from bearing. Consort with my maid. Perhaps I shall have a son through her. And Abram heeded Sarai's request. So Sarai, Abram's wife, took her maid, Hagar the Egyptian, after Abram had dwelt in the land of Canaan 10 years, and gave her to her husband as a concubine. He cohabited with Hagar, and she conceived. And when she saw that she had conceived, her mistress was lowered in her esteem. And Sarai said to Abram, the wrong done to me is your fault. I myself put my maid in your bosom. Now that she sees that she is pregnant, I am lowered in her esteem. The Lord decide between you and me. Abram said to Sarai, your maid is in your hands. Deal with her as you think right. Then Sarai treated her harshly, and she ran away from her. An angel of the Lord found her by a spring of water in the wilderness, the spring on the road to Shur. And she said, Hagar, slave of Sarai, where have you come from, and where are you going? And she said, I am running away from my mistress Sarai. And the angel of the Lord said to her, go back to your mistress and submit to her harsh treatment. And the angel of the Lord said to her, I will greatly increase your offspring, and they shall be too many to count.
We're going to do 5 more lines. Thank you.
Sure. The angel of the Lord said to her further, behold, you are with child and shall bear a son. You shall call him Ishmael, for the Lord has paid heed to your suffering. He shall be a wild ass of a man, and his hand against everyone, and everyone's hand against him. He shall dwell alongside all of his kinsmen.
Okay. 3 more lines. Thank you so much.
Sure. And she called the Lord who spoke to her. You are El Roy, by which she meant have I not gone on seeing after he saw me? Therefore the well was called Bir
Lahai Roi.
Roi. It is between Kadesh and Bered. Hagar bore a son to Abram, and Abram gave the son that Hagar bore to him the name Ishmael.
Okay, great. All right. So let me see if I can make this a little bit smaller so that we can get all the text. But so let's summarize in the chat. I'm actually going to do this, just English, so we can see it all. What's going on here? First of all, who are our key characters? Sarai, that's Sarah. She'll get a name change. Avram, that's Abraham. And Hagar. What are sort of like the main things that happen here? You can either throw it in the chat or come off mute. What is going on here? The first thing that happens is Sarai gives Hagar, says like, I can't have kids. You should have a concubine. And then they conceive and she's mad, right? Arguments, blaming. Thank you, Richard. There's a Hebrew word that says Sarai scorns Hagar, and it literally means to belittle her. She's a lightweight in her eyes. Then Sarah and Abraham argue. And then Sarah actually afflicts and abuses Hagar. The word in Hebrew that happens here actually means torture in modern Hebrew. So it's a pretty fraught moment, right? So Sarah said, fine, have a kid with my concubine. Then she's mad about it. Then she is abusive towards Hagar. Then Hagar runs away. And then an angel of God finds Hagar at the spring of water. Yeah, we see all of human beings' vulnerabilities here, right? That's so true, Lori. Sarah's behavior seems unnatural to her. Lori, do you want to say more about that? Do you want to come off and say more? Yeah, great.
It's just that she seems, in every other case, she seems understanding of God and his relationship to her and Abram. But now with this child, she's become brutish to her maid servant. It's just such an extreme change in behavior. You know, perhaps that's her motherly instinct has now changed her. She's become the mother bear protecting her, or pushing away the other cub. I'm not sure, but it just seems such an extreme change in her behavior and such a cruel way to act.
Yeah, it is cruel. It's surprising. There's some interesting questions. It seems that does Hagar lower Sarah in her esteem? Did Hagar lord her pregnancy over Sarah? Or, you know, for people who have experienced fertility issues, which I'm modernizing this, but seeing anyone who's pregnant can be difficult, especially if you were the one that was like, hey, can you be the surrogate? Let's see. Hagar was an Egyptian. Likely, her name means stranger. So we'll go more into that in a second. Sarah was jealous of Hagar since she was barren. Yeah, exactly. Okay, so we're going to go forward. So something that happens, let me share my screen. Hopefully you guys can see it. Great, good. Okay. So this is all based on learning or scholarship by Robert Alter, who is a professor, I believe, in Berkeley. I learned it all through my professor, Adrienne Levine. And it talks about the different scenes that we're seeing going on, right? A barren woman, Ishmael is born, and these are called biblical type scenes, which are biblical literary patterns. So the first one is that we might have seen already, or we will see in Genesis, is called an annunciation. A mother-to-be receives information from God or a divine messenger concerning the future birth of a male child. We see that in Va'era when angels or three men come and tell Sarah, you're going to have a boy, and she laughs. And then ultimately her son's name is Yitzchak, which means laugh. Often instructions or information are given about the hero's future. And the female recipient of this knowledge frequently reacts with fear or wonder or laughter. This is a little bit of an annunciation scene because Ishmael is deeply important to Islam. And also the relationship between Ishmael and Isaac plays out in Torah to help us. Honestly, it elevates Isaac over Ishmael, which is a little bit of a polemic in Torah. But so we see how this type scene is taking place. The other one is a barrenness of a patriarch's wife. So again, it often foreshadows the birth of a hero. So Sarah has Isaac, Rebecca has Joseph. Rebecca has Jacob and Esau. Rachel has Joseph. I was like, that doesn't sound right. And Hannah gives birth to someone who becomes king. And then ultimately that's the Davidic line. So the other type scene that we've seen is called place naming after Theophany. Naming a place after an encounter with God, encountering the future betrothed at a well, an epiphany in a field, danger in the desert with the discovery of a well, or some other form of sustenance, a testament of a dying hero. So we see this. So Hagar encounters God or an angel in that moment and calls the place Be'er Lechai Ro'i. This is the place where God has seen me. And so it's kind of an interesting thing, like how names in Torah happen, because it's often about maybe an encounter with God or something happening there. And then that's the name that sometimes even is maintained until today. So Be'er Lechai Ro'i, they say perhaps is down by Beersheba, which is in the south of Israel, and also is a place with a lot of wells, they say. So Be'er means the well. Okay, so this is some interesting things just to give you some context. But so let's take a look at Hagar's name. So first of all, Hagar in Arabic, the root word in Arabic means Hajira. So we've heard of Hajj, right? When people go on Hajj in Islam to holy sites. So that's the same root word as Hagar's name. The foreigner, Hagera. In Judaism, one of the ways of referring to people who become Jewish is ger, right? Someone who converts in. I don't love it because it implies that they were foreign, but that is the name that we use. And then there's also the banished one, Hagerusha, right? So these are all sort of true of Hagar. She's wandering. She's definitely foreign to the setting, right? She's not part of, she's a concubine. She's not part of the core Israelite family. And also then she gets banished. So now I want to look at any questions before I move ahead. Let me see what's going on in the chat. Okay. Any questions? Just want to. Cool. Okay. So let's take a look at who Hagar was. Let's try to unpack her identity. Okay. So the first identity that she might have is being a slave, because that's what the Torah calls her, an Egyptian slave. Shivcha Mitzrit. Yeah, so she is Egyptian, for the question asking that earlier. And then the sages, the Midrash, the rabbis are like, who is she really? So let's see. Can I have another reader to read Genesis Rabbah? Anyone? Wendy, will you be my reader again? I appreciate you. Thank you.
She was Pharaoh's daughter. When Pharaoh, saw the miracles that were wrought for Sarah, he said, "It is better that my daughter be a handmaid in this household than a mistress in another household."
Okay, so how did an Egyptian slave end up with Abraham and Sarah? where's the connection? When have they been in Egypt previously? Earlier on in this portion. Yeah, Dabi? You're muted, Dabi.
When they came to Egypt and Abraham was afraid that she was so beautiful that he would be in trouble, he said to her, pretend that you're my sister, and then Pharaoh took her until God intervened.
Yes, right.
And notice God intervened and not Abraham.
Yeah, it's a pretty complex moment where Abraham is like, hey, he doesn't really take responsibility. God intervenes. And then even Pharaoh is like, why didn't you tell me? And so it's possible. And I think that this is what the rabbis who wrote this Midrash are suggesting, is that maybe Hagar came back with them. We don't know, but somehow there is a connection at that point between Abraham and Sarah and Egypt. Esther. Wait, Esther, you're still muted. Let me ask you to unmute. See if you can accept that invitation. There you go.
Okay. We're talking about Abraham saying that he was a brother instead of her husband, but that actually was the custom at the time, that the brothers were responsible, because I'm thinking of Lavan and Rivka. The same idea, that the brothers took the responsibility. So less blame on Abraham. Because
okay. So maybe it's not as bad. Maybe it's not as bad as our modern.
Because historically, the brothers took responsibility.
Great, thank you. Let's see, Wendy.
Yeah, and so I just read, because I was talking to a friend about this, that Abraham actually explains that Sarah is his half-sister. This is a bit later, and which has always confused me.
Where did you read that?
I just looked it up. I think it's Genesis 20, verse 12. I have it right. Yeah, let me just see. Which confused me.
Let me go look.
Oh, maybe I've got it wrong.
Oh, interesting. Yeah, it does say, and besides, she is in truth my sister, my father's daughter. They're not my mother's, and she became my wife. Never noticed that before. Interesting. Okay.
So he sort of isn't lying in a way. He's asking for an alternate truth to be told to the Pharaoh.
Yeah, so definitely some of us are trying to recuperate Abraham and basically be like, it's actually true. Ivan, thank you. Garusha also means divorced in modern Hebrew. Appreciate that. Esther, you wanted to add something? You're muted again.
I actually have a question.
Okay.
If Egypt is a moral society that will not take somebody's wife, isn't murder worse than having somebody's wife? Because Abraham is afraid that he will be killed.
Right.
So they would, in other words, the Egyptian moral system is so foreign from our understanding of it.
Yeah.
At the second point, it says that Abraham saw that she was beautiful. And the question is, why now? Because of her color. The Egyptians they came from a different place. Her complexion was so different, and different is desirable. And this is why Abraham suddenly realizes that she's different from them.
Are you talking Abraham and Sarah or Abraham and Hagar?
Abraham and Sarah. We were talking about going to Egypt. Yeah. So Abraham said to Sarah, say, you're my sister. And because he realized she's beautiful.
Oh, because she looks different than everyone else. I see. Interesting. Great point. Great point. Thank you. Okay, any other questions? I want to look at one more text. I'll read this one. So this is Chizkuni, he's commenting on the Genesis Rabbah Midrash text, 13th century France. When Pharaoh handed over his daughter to Sarai, when the latter was a captive in his palace, he said to her, "My daughter is your compensation for having wronged you. Here is your reward." As a result, she was renamed Hagar. Okay. So interesting. So again, how does Hagar end up in their home? Perhaps an exchange that happens when they go down to Egypt. Okay. So first of all, what else do we know about Hagar? She's very fertile, right? Genesis Rabbah says, and he came unto Hagar, and she conceived from the first union. Okay. So we moderns know it doesn't really work exactly like that, but this is an annunciation moment where an important person is born in Torah. In this case, it's Ishmael, which really sets up like a competitive moment, right? So we have Sarah and Hagar who become competition for one another. And eventually we have Ishmael and Isaac who also become competitive for one another, even though eventually they do come back together when it's time to bury Abraham. Okay, so someone said, maybe she lorded her pregnancy over Sarah. Could that be why Sarah was so upset? So, and so we see here, let me just move that over. So we see in Genesis 16:4 that Abraham came to Hagar and she became pregnant. I mean, it literally says, just if you're wondering about the Hebrew, it just says bo, like he came to her. And when she saw that she had become pregnant, and it's interesting, and it's like vatahar, like quickly, like maher. And when she saw that she had become pregnant, her mistress became for her an object of scorn. Okay, so Rashi, referencing a Midrash, says the following. Wendy, my reader, I need you.
Okie doke. Hagar said, this Sarah is not what she seems to be. Her conduct in secret is not like her conduct in public. She behaves as if she were a righteous woman when she is not righteous, since she did not merit conception all these years while I became pregnant the first time.
Okay, so first of all, this is the rabbis imagining what Hagar said. What do you think about what the Midrash and Rashi say about this? How do you think they feel about Hagar? Go ahead and throw it in the chat. Sherry, Sarai was not renamed to Hagar. Pharaoh's daughter was renamed to Hagar. Arrogance, says Wendy. You're my bestie today. What do you think? So the rabbis are saying she's arrogant. I titled this section of it haughty, right? She's proud. Why do you think they do that? Why do they want to set Hagar apart in this way? Esther?
I think there are two important reasons. First of all, Isaac is the one that we're going to have the line from.
Yeah.
So it's important not to take Ishmael. And second, I think that Sarah was disappointed. She gave Hagar to Abraham thinking she'll be like a surrogate mother. And instead, Hagar turned against her and said, look, I'm better than you are. So that's not only she can't have a child, but she kind of rubbed it into her. And Sarah, being human, reacted.
So it's the arrogance, the haughtiness. Let's see, Lori, thank you, Esther. Lori, you said it's very interesting. Here is possibly a woman of means putting on airs. We often see this today. Not surprising that Hagar would feel this way. Okay, so some empathy for Hagar, right? She's like, Sarah's not as great as she thinks she is, and she actually behaves differently publicly than she does privately. Phyllis and Warren, yeah, I think that's an interesting point. This is an opportunity for Hagar to regain some of her status. She was a royal, right? And now she's a concubine, she's a servant, perhaps a slave. Marion, you're saying that this is trying to justify Hagar's expulsion, right? So the rabbis, and we see this often when there's a duality of like the person who becomes the leader of the Israelite and therefore Jewish people, they always err on the side of that person. So when it's Jacob and Esau, the rabbis are not into Esau. Similarly, you can imagine why they prefer Isaac over Ishmael and then Sarah over Hagar. Brad, do you want to come off mute and just share more about what you typed?
Yeah, I mean, I've always been extraordinarily troubled by the treatment of Hagar in the Bible. And it's heart-wrenching to read the story of her leaving her baby and going away so she doesn't have to hear its cries of dying of thirst. And it's always felt to me, and this may just be a completely modern reading, but it always feels to me like we're trying to justify this cruel behavior after the fact.
Yeah, I think like it is heart-wrenching what we see Hagar go through, but the narrative and the scholarship all wants us to empathize with Sarah, and to not see the broader pain going on for Hagar. It really is heart-wrenching. So I appreciate that comment. And you said, it's absolutely reprehensible conduct on the part of Abraham and Sarai. So I think a lot of us agree with you. I'll read this one. So Rambam says, Sarah, our mother, sinned. Rambam agrees with you, Brad. Sinned in dealing harshly with her handmaid, and Abraham too by allowing her to do so. God heard her affliction and gave her a son who was destined to be a lawless person who would bring suffering on Abraham and Sarah. So in some ways, Rambam is saying, they're going to get punished by Ishmael, which this creates like a sort of, I don't love it, like a Jewish Muslim or Jewish and other divisiveness. But I do appreciate that Rambam, it says, Sarah was wrong. Sarah was wrong and Abraham was wrong. And the power dynamic is problematic. Okay, so let's see. So Radak, Rabbi David Kimchi. Julie, go ahead.
Isn't this the beginning of where we get the conflict between Jews and Arabs? Isn't this the origin of it?
This is the foreshadowing, and the other foreshadowing is next week when Sarah dies in Chaye Sarah. That might be in 2 weeks, excuse me. When Sarah dies and Abraham demands to purchase the plot of land to bury her, which is in Hebron. And so, yes, this does set up all of those conflicts.
The schism.
And so, go ahead.
The schism.
Yeah, exactly. Right. And it's really a binary here, right? There's no like Seeds of Peace soccer camp for them all to play at, right? This is like, it's really setting up the Israelites are
the chosen people.
Yeah, and doesn't use that language yet, but it's really setting that up. Gregory and then Dobby again. Gregory, if you want to come off mute. There you go. Oh, you just muted again.
Say that I agree with the lady that just spoke. Well, I thought the same thing, that this sort of sets up the schism, if you please, between the Jews and the Arabs. I picked that up last night when I was reading the Parsha for this week, and I thought to myself, this sort of sets the tone, sets the the setting, the plot. I kind of looked at it in a literary sense, but I thought the same thing. And the gentleman that says that he feels bad for Hagar, I have to say that I have, even growing up as a Baptist, have always felt when reading this story, this part of the story of Genesis, I always felt sorry for Hagar. I have always felt as though she Abraham, of course, Sarah goes off and chooses her. And it's like, Sarah, how do why get upset when you chose Hagar? You made her the chosen one. But then you grow to, I hope I'm not using an incorrect word, but hate her or have some sort of, I don't know. I guess maybe hatred is not the correct word, but dislike. Sort of disgruntled with the whole idea that Hagar, is, the one that is going to conceive Abraham's first child.
Yes.
So
yes.
I just want to say that I agree with the gentleman that spoke and
Thank
the
you.
lady that just recently spoke. And I just wanted to, follow up with, by saying that I agree.
Thank you, Gregory.
Thank you.
Awesome. Thank you so much. Dobby and then Esther.
I've always seen Genesis as a book that shows the people, all of our people, Abraham, Isaac, Jacob, Sarah, all of them are flawed in some way.
Mm-hmm.
And they all are humanly flawed, and they do things that are definitely wrong. God steps in when Abraham doesn't act. God steps in again when Sarah didn't act, not as so much an intervention, but I think to show, well, this is the way it should be.
Right? Does God
Because
justify
I see the book as a kind of moral lesson of learning from the mistakes of others.
Yeah.
And then, showing us the right way to do it.
And we also see these types of relationships manifest in our lives today, right? Inequities, power dynamics, and things like that. So that's why I love Torah, because it's about the human condition from the dawn of creation.
It never gets old.
It never gets old. It's very old, but it never gets old. Fabulous. Thank you. So for those of us that feel, Esther, go ahead, and then I'm going to continue.
I agree with Debbie that we are flawed. But if I take God's reaction when Sarah wants to get rid of Ishmael and Hagar because it was bad influence, bad company for Isaac. So therefore, I would, if it was me and my children, I would do the same thing. I would separate my children from company that I think is a bad influence. So
some resonance, some modern resonance, like.
And it's God saying to Abraham, listen to Sarah and do as she says. So to me, that's an important lesson. It's true that people are flawed, but don't expose your children to bad company.
I hear you. Yeah. Thank you, Esther. So Radak agrees with many of the comments. Rabbi David Kimchi, which I always imagine he is like a fermented rabbi, right? Kimchi. So he agrees with how many of us feel about how Hagar is treated. He says Sarai overburdened her with work, made her perform the work in an intolerably harsh manner. It's even possible, as I said earlier, that the word used to describe how Sarai treats her includes physical as well as verbal abuse. The Torah testifies, says Rabbi David Kimchi, that Sarai did not act piously towards her. Although Abraham had given her a free hand, right, Esther, what you're saying, when he said, do to her as appears fit in your eyes, from a moral point of view, she should have treated Hagar in a manner befitting her status as a wife or legal companion of Avram. From the point of view of practicing human kindness, although Avram gave her a free hand when he said, do to her as appears fit, interesting, I repeated the same thing. She should have been nice to her, is what Radak is saying. Okay, but there's more to Hagar. So she's not just, she's fertile. She's not just a slave. She may be haughty, but she's also suffering. But she's also divinely connected, right? So God talks to her, which is fascinating. God talking to people who are not among the Israelites, or we'll say an angel of God finds her. The Midrash, which again would be like 2nd to 6th century probably. How many angels did she meet? Rabbi Yossi Bar Hanania said 5. Each time that it says, and he said it was another angel. The other sages say 4. Whether it's 4 or 5, there are a lot of angels that come to speak to her. And why, says Seforno from 16th century Italy? Because the angel found her in a state of readiness to receive a divine vision. As a result, he appeared to her. After all, it is not likely that an angel roamed the earth looking for Hagar. That's an editorial comment, I think. Okay, so she's able to connect. She's a believer, or she's open to revelation. So that's another interesting piece to her. We don't know if it's an angel of what God, right? Is it an Egyptian? Like we're in a monotheistic space now because this is Abraham's monotheistic one God life. But somehow an angel of God finds Hagar, and she's not actually an Israelite. So that's another interesting point about Hagar. She also becomes the mother of a nation, right? God, the angel of Adonai says to her, I will greatly multiply your descendants. They shall be too numerous to count. And then the angel of Adonai continued, look, you are pregnant and shall bear a son. Call him Ishmael, for God has heard your affliction. So this is the root Shema, hear, listen, and El, God hears. And then the text says, he shall be a wild ass of a man. His hand shall be against all, and the hand of all shall be against him. He shall dwell in permanent opposition to all his kin. So again, we see that schism, right? This is setting up Ishmael to be a father of a people, but to be very different than the Israelite people. She also has some major power, which is that she has the power to name things, right? She names the space El Roi. She names it Be'er Lechai Roi. And that is really interesting that she again has this power to name a place after meeting God. She's not among the Israelite people, and they're not Israelites yet, but you get what I'm saying. So that's pretty remarkable that she has that power. Let me see if I stop my share, if I can see you guys. So for whatever reason, I can't see all of you if I stop share, so I'm just gonna leave it on. So Be'er Lechai Roi is an interesting place. I actually have an article or a chapter in a book called the Musar Torah Commentary. And it's actually about Chaye Sarah. And it's about the place Be'er Lechai Roi, because I was really fascinated after the binding of Isaac, the Akedah, how Isaac doesn't talk again. We don't hear from him for a very long time. And it's something like 55 lines or something, which is a long silence in Torah. And the question is, what happens to him? Where does he go? And the rabbis, as they do, imagine various places that he goes. But the one place that the Torah eventually says is that he was coming from Be'er Lechai Roi. And that's where Hagar lives. And so there's something really powerful about this place. And there's something powerful about people who have painful experiences in Torah, that maybe they go to find each other at this place. And so that's what that article is about. That was produced by the CCAR Torah Commentary, which is a way to follow the Torah through Musar, the framework for how to be our best selves through Jewish values. But so before we wrap up, I just want to see if there's any more comments or questions. Yes, we will, Julie, I realize my final text sheet they don't have access to, so we'll make sure that you all get that. Has anyone ever written, oh, Lori, I love that question. Has anyone ever written a Midrash on what if Ishmael and Isaac were not separated and grew up together? They actually do end up being together. Later on, and again, Sarah and Hagar are still disagreeing, and there's some commentary of like how Ishmael treats Isaac based on their circumcision. He's like, I got circumcised when I was 13 or 18, and you didn't have to really deal with the pain as a sentient being. So there is some there, but I think it's to rewrite the story, Lori, of like, what if it wasn't a schism, right? What if in fact it had turned out into a beautiful relationship. That would be beautiful. They do come back together to bury Abraham later. So any other questions or comments before I wrap us up? So I think, oh, Esther, final comment?
Oh, sorry. It's just, I think Ishmael should get the credit for Kibbud Av.
For honoring his father. Yeah. So thank you. So one of the things, so we saw here in the text that Abram and Sarai have these names before they become Abraham and Sarai, right? They're called Abram and Sarai. Eventually, once they are fully brought into the covenant, their names became Sarah and Avraham. A hey is added in. And that's divinity. That's one of the ways that we spell Adonai is hey yud, or yud hey vav hey. And what's interesting is that Hagar's name already has a hey in it.
Yeah.
And maybe that's why she had the ability to commune with the divine. So most common readings of the text suggest that Hagar is a ger, a foreigner, and a person to whom Adonai is foreign. But really, her life actually parallels the lives of our other Torah characters in so many ways, because she knows the Jewish God. She knows the Israelite God. So she's not foreign at all. And so perhaps we can learn more about ourselves from the foreigners in our midst. And perhaps we could all imagine what it would look like to add a hey to our names, right? What would it look like if this conversation, and I think to that question, what if it would look like if it had been more divine, if the relationships had been divine? Then we would all merit the opportunity to really walk in God's ways. So for Lech Lecha, I wish us all a blessing of a safe journey to wherever we're going next, and to whatever path our lives follow. May we be blessed. And as Debbie Friedman's rendering of this concludes, she sings, "You shall be a blessing, you shall be a blessing, you shall be a blessing, Lechi Lach."